1. Welcome to the David the Dog Trainer podcast, episode 155.
Hello.
Today is Monday, which means that it should be the day the new podcast is coming out, but instead it is the day we are recording the new podcast. And that is because I have been sick AF for the last 10 days.
Ugh.
So here we are.
Dang.
I'm finally recovered. I think I'm like 97%, you know?
Yeah.
I feel pretty good. I feel like my voice sounds as crystal clear as everybody's used to it sounding. You know?
Yeah. Maybe it was that last podcast, dude. By the end of it, when I was editing it, I was like, oh man, he was...
What day did we film the last one at? Was it a Thursday?
That was Thursday, yeah.
Yeah, that would have been it, because Friday, the day after, is when I started feeling unwell.
Yeah.
Just a little, I was like, oh, I didn't even think I'm sick. I just felt like, oh, I don't feel as good as I normally do.
Yeah.
But I didn't think twice about it. And then Saturday morning, whoo, man, I woke up Saturday morning and I was like,
nope.
Game over.
Game over, man.
Game
I hate
over.
that.
And then it just hit me like a freaking train, and I was out.
Being sick is the worst.
Yeah, it's not great.
It's not great.
It's not great. When I'm sick, my go-to is just I get my little blender bottle, right? And I've got my emergencies lined up and I've got my liquid IVs lined up, and I just alternate, just boom, 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 boom. But I just don't stop drinking liquids.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I mean, that's good.
And yeah. And then Kate just loads me up. She just comes over. She I feel like I'm in, when you're in the mental ward where they give you the little cup, right?
Yeah,
with stuff in it. She just comes over. She just hands me a cup and there's 7 things in it, and I'm just like,
Okay.
yeah,
I trust you. You're my doctor.
yeah, right. But we're back, so here we are.
That's good. I'm glad to hear that you're feeling better.
What's been new?
I think since last time I went to the Arnold.
Yeah.
Which was a fun time. I was doing some filming for some guy selling some snake oils and stuff. I think some banded platform that you do some reps on.
Yeah.
Got to pass by some fitness influencers.
There you go.
Other than that, this was my slow week because the next 2 weeks are going to be pretty stacked. So kind of kept it low key.
Low key.
Yeah.
What do you got going on the next couple weeks?
Tomorrow I got Chula U at John Carroll. It's they got a
is that a little pop-up thing they have there or whatever?
Yeah,
Condensed version of
Chula. In the cafeteria. They got one there, and then one in Kent at Kent State.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we have to get there at 7:30 in the morning tomorrow. It's gonna be real fun. I got 2 shoots over at the Hilton. Mm-hmm. We had to split it into 2 days because we're finally going to get into the Burnham. What else we got? I got another winery shoot. 3 wineries out in Ashtabula County for the Ashtabula Board of Tourism. Mm-hmm.
What wineries are you doing this time? Do you know?
I don't know yet. She's supposed to get that to me this week about our itinerary, but we're going to bounce into 2 or 3 different ones.
Sick.
Yeah, so it's going to be a fun week ahead. So
sounds like it.
Yeah.
I got my next. So we recently, I don't know if I talked about this on the podcast or not, but we recently put on our website a new page. And this is good for any of our listeners, actually. It's all of our options we have for out of state or out of town clients. From the standpoint of if you don't live in Cleveland or live close enough to justify coming up for, weekly classes or regular board and train support from the standpoint of, coming in and out for your follow-ups and stuff like that. We have a lot of clients that live, say, 2 hours away that, them coming up for a board and train is not really that big of a deal, right?
Yeah.
And them coming up, once a month after that for some follow-up classes is, not really that big of a deal. Or even, one-on-one classes. We've had plenty of clients from Columbus, which, again, 2.5 hours away, that will do a one-on-one program, like a 10-session program, and they'll just do like 2-hour sessions, right? So they'll come up, instead of 10 times over 10 weeks, they'll come up 5 times over 5 or 10 weeks, right? And either come every other week or every week and do a 2-hour class, and they can still kind of reap the benefits of working with their dog, and it's not too much of an inconvenience for them past it. But for all of our clients that live further than that, 4 hours, 5 hours, we have a lot of Chicago clients, we have a lot of clients from New York, other places that we've had clients come up from. We wanted to compile a list of, excuse me, a list of all of the options of how you could work with your dog with us, right? So we put that up, I want to say maybe a month ago. It went live. And since then, we've been having so many people reach out to us about it, just because I feel like, up until that point, people didn't realize that training with us was still an option past doing like a Zoom class, right? Which we do plenty of. And even those, like when people would reach out to us about it, we would just basically message them like, hey, we could do classes via Zoom. It's $150 an hour. And, we could coach you through things with your dog that way, right? But having it more officially put together that you guys can see on the website. If you go on miraclecaninetraining.com, go to the drop down tab that says services, and then there's like out of town and virtual training options, right? And basically there's kind of 3 different routes you can go with your dog, right? So route number 1 is standard virtual classes, which can be as beneficial as you want them to be, basically, is how I describe it, right? Some people like hopping on and just kind of talking through some of the issues they have with their dogs, and we put most of the emphasis into the client. Obviously the age-old saying of training's for the owner, not for the dog. We could usually work you through figuring out and kind of diagnosing where your dog's behavioral issues are coming from, what you might be doing to contribute to those problems, and some tactical things you could implement right off the rip to we've talked about, stop the bleeding and make sure it doesn't get any worse. And 2, have some solutions you could start implementing right off the rip, right? So that's like one option, obviously. We have a lot of clients that we're able to get them to just turn the camera around, right? And then we could walk them through in real time working with their dog. And I actually just did a really fantastic one maybe a week and a half ago. I think we're going to have a reel going live of it today. And basically, we had this client that reached out to us. She's from I want to say Milwaukee, if I'm not mistaken. Whatever. She's got a husky that's had just handling aggression issues, right? Grooming the dog, doing the dog's nails, stuff like that. And she's never really been able to successfully do it. The dog's like 6 or 7 at this point, right? And we were able to, in real time, go over, I think I even have the notes here from it. So he would not get into the bathtub. She couldn't brush him, and she couldn't do his nails, right? And she sent me all this like before footage and stuff of him like snapping and acting out and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And we were able to, Milwaukee, I've written right here. I have all these checks that we just went through one at a time, right? He wouldn't get in the bathtub. I showed her how to get him in the bathtub, and then he would get in and out, no problem, right? She couldn't brush him. I showed her how to work him through brushing him, right? She couldn't do his nails. I showed her how to work through doing his nails. And in real time, pull up this video real quick here. So like in real time, this is literally a video of her live from the Zoom call, clipping his nails, working on counter conditioning it, working through his little aggressive outbursts and stuff that she had, right? And she had never been able to do that before, right? So
Awesome.
So that was an option of something we were able to do with it.
Yeah.
We worked through plenty of other things. We have a lot of clients reach out to us about dogs getting in fights with each other that we do virtual classes with, because a lot of that is how you're setting up the environment at home, all of those types of things, whatever, right? So virtual classes is an option we have. Obviously, for any out-of-state clients, a board and train is always going to be an option. If you don't feel like there is somebody local to you that you trust well enough to be able to provide the support that you need, and you want to get a taste of how we do it, and you want to get the quote-unquote expertise that we provide with our board and train clients, that is an option for it. And the only commitment that it requires from you is, 1, you being able to get the dog up to us, right? And 2, you be able to come here and pick up the dog and spend a couple of days working with us. And then at that point, everything else we could do virtually, right? Once we know the dog And we understand how the dog responds to different types of training, different types of correction, different types of reward, stuff like that. We could coach you through 99.9% of any issues you'll run into once you go home via Zoom then at that point, right? The other option that we have is obviously our condensed one-on-one program, which is where I get to. Today, I have a client coming into town from Virginia for one of these. And basically what we do is if you could come up here and you could spend 4 days here, we can condense 10 hours of training into that 4 days, and we could make sure that it is as productive as we need it to be.
Yeah.
We give you a serious crash course into stuff. We get you all the tools that you're going to need once the dog goes home. And once you go home to take that training and roll with it. And we've been having a ton of people sign up for that. We have 2 dogs coming up. Like I said, today, right after I film this podcast, I got to go into the shop, and we're effectively starting with them. So they arrive at 1 o'clock today. And I think these 2 dogs are getting into fights with each other, and they don't know how to start getting past it.
Yeah.
So that's an option also. And then you'll see in all of those program options that we have listed on there, we also added the option where, depending on how worth it is for you, if you want me to come out and work with you wherever you are, that is always on the table as far as negotiations of how we can make it happen. Whether it's we do the reverse of what I just described, where I come out and spend 3 or 4 days with you and we just crash course into things in your home, wherever it is that you live, whether it's you do a boarding train and then you want to do the follow-up support then in the home. From the standpoint of we could do board and train and then 3 or 4 days of training in the house, then post board and train. That is an option. I have one of those that I'm actually going to be doing at the end of the month. We have 2 dogs in right now, 2 Rottweilers from Chicago, and the owner wanted me to come and do the send home lesson in the house. So we were able to work something out. I'll actually be driving these dogs home post board and train and spending 3 days with the client, working in her house with these 2 dogs, making sure everything transitions really smoothly. Sky's the limit as far as how far you want to get this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And some of those options are not going to be super cheap. But again, if you desperately feel like you can't find anywhere else that you could truly trust to provide the support that you ultimately want, it's on the table. And I feel like a lot of people, they'll hear that and be like, there's no way that they can't find somewhere that's local to them that they could trust and work with. And to that, I always say, guys, you don't understand how much trash there is in the dog training world right now. Last podcast, we talked about this client that I worked with that had this reactive doodle, right? And she had done like a 30-day board and train with this dog, like freaking 10 individual one-on-one lessons with this other trainer, right? And she didn't know how to handle this dog still. And I explained, and the video actually went live. It's been doing extremely well on YouTube so far. I recommend everybody watch it. I think it's pinned to the top of our page right now. But that client, in one session, right, we were able to almost totally fix everything that she had. And it was actually wild. So last time we talked about this on the podcast, I had just done the session, right? And I hadn't really talked to her since, right? Things were, we had a great session. She signed up for a couple extra sessions with us to kind of keep the ball rolling. She had her first session the other day, right? And she was doing the lessons with Michelle. I moved her to Michelle for all of the follow-up classes. And I ran into her and I'm like, hey, like, how's it going? I was like, hey, are you staying on him? You know? And she literally looked at me and God, I fucking wish I could have filmed her saying this because it was so crazy. Hold on, let the anticipation build.
Tension building.
Yeah. She literally said since that session, she has not had one single reactivity episode on the leash. Woo! Literally not one. And this wasn't even me like, are things going better, whatever. I was just like, how's it going, right? And that's when she just said, literally, we walk right by dogs on our walk, and he doesn't fucking do anything.
Let's go.
He doesn't do anything, right? One session, guys. right? And that even exceeded my expectations because the way I looked at it, I was like, okay, cool. Like I showed her what the dog is capable of in this session, but because I was kind of assessing things, I was assessing her handling.
Yeah.
You know, we got to get a lot of practice in that session, but like I figured there was going to be more coaching that she needed, you know, but it was just, we filled in the gaps between what the last trainer taught her and what she needed in order to thrive and to succeed. Right.
Yeah.
It's, and like,
yeah,
it was gone. You know what I mean? Like it's fucking gone.
Yeah. That's insane.
So like sometimes it can be that simple. Sometimes it can be.
Yeah.
You know, which kind of segues us into wrapping up the conversation we were just having and moving into what we're actually going to talk about today. Okay. Like this is why we offer these options for people where like if it is that worth it for you and you want to work with us, right? It might be expensive, but let's say hypothetically, like I would say to give people like a rough ballpark, like if you wanted me to come out for 3 days, right, to spend 3 days with you and you're domestic, right, you're in the US and you're not in some like weird city that I gotta take 20 connection flights to get to, right, or anything like that, like you're probably looking in the range of like $6,000, something like that for like 3 days, give or take, right, again, depending on the city. That's still fucking cheaper than working with 2 local trainers, taking your luck with 2 local trainers and, not quite getting where you want to be. Right.
Yeah, that's true.
So sky's the limit. There's a lot of options for you. And since we, like I said, we posted that all live on our website to give people that option, right. Of how we could still assist you no matter where you're at. Right. So that's an option, but that kind of segues us into kind of the main portion of what we're going to talk about today, which is that specific video that we posted of working with that client with the reactivity issues that she was experiencing. It's been doing very, very well on YouTube, and we've been getting a lot of comments of people, one, either asking us questions, right, on like, hey, like what, like, like this is cool, right? But like they don't understand this thing or they don't understand this thing or whatever. So we'll kind of dive into some of that kind of stuff. Okay. And then past that, it's been sparking some like people, whatever,
Oh, some haters?
It's been maybe sparking some haters, right? Okay. So there's we'll do the questions. We'll talk about the hater situation a little bit. So we'll start with the hater situation a little bit because I don't want to like dig really, really deep into it because supposedly this individual is going to be coming on the podcast on Friday, right? We'll see if it happens. So you guys will all see that there's an individual. His name's Dale McCluskey. Something like that, right? Dale McCluskey, I believe is his name, right?
Hi, Dale.
And he is he's a dog trainer, right, in the Florida area. And he's just been making a ton of videos about us lately, right? And my issue is the videos he's making are like grossly misrepresenting the work that we're doing and to the videos that we're posting. He made a video recently about that specific video, right? And it was like 42 minutes long. And here's the thing that frustrated me too, is that like we've had this, like we've been scheduled to do this, like call it debate, call it whatever, live on the podcast for like a week and a half now, right? And since we've been scheduled for it, he's just continued to make videos about us, which I think is a little bit annoying because it's like, bro, like save it for literally when we talk in person. Right?
Yeah, really.
Where we could actually debate these points, right?
Yeah.
But you guys can go watch the video. It's up right now.
Yeah.
The video that we posted, the reactivity video, it's 22 minutes long, right?
Yeah.
And obviously, as I just explained to everybody, shit worked, right? Like this lady is literally like out there walking her dog like a fucking G right now, like
loving life,
problems, loving life, right?
Yep.
And my problem is his video he made is like 42 minutes long, and in the video you'll see that he watched the first 1 minute and like 36 seconds of the video and then like just rambled on and on and on and on, like talking in circles about like I'm not even 100% sure what, right? Basically, in a nutshell, that like we didn't solve the problem, and what this is the problem with balanced dog training and the e-collar and this and that, and like he like ended the video right when we started actually working with the dog. So it's like misrepresenting. He's like, look, like they're not in tune with, like the dog, and look at all this stuff they're letting the dog get away with, but then they're trying to cherry pick now, correcting the reactivity and stuff. And it's like that whole first like minute and like 30 seconds of the video that he watched and was reacting to, I said at the very beginning of the video, this was my first time meeting the client ever, and I told her, let's go outside and I want to watch what you're currently doing.
Yeah.
Right? I was like, I'm not going to be critiquing you yet. I need to see what you're doing so I could see what you're doing wrong so I could then coach you through the things that you adjusted. And he just cherry picked that entire first part of the video where I was just assessing what the client was doing and was like, look, he's letting this slide, this slide, this slide, this slide, this slide. It's like... Yeah. Like, it's exactly what I was doing.
Are you watching the video? Did you?
So whatever. So I really hope that this actually happens, because there's been a lot of dog trainers out there that have attempted to debate with this guy before. And, I found some videos as I was kind of like doing some research on him, basically saying that, this guy has done this in waves over the last, his channel was made like 9 years ago or something. And over the course of the last 9 years, he's gone through these waves of he'll make like hundreds of videos about like 3 or 4 different trainers. And then he'll wipe his entire page, right? So he'll delete all of the videos. They'll just disappear, right? Yeah. And I'm not sure why, obviously, but he deletes all the videos, and then he'll pick like 3 or 4 other trainers and then just make tons of videos about them, right? And I think it'll make a good conversation. Listen, I'm here for the conversation. I'm not here to, I'm not here to like have them on and like try to be like, oh, fuck you. Or fuck you know what I mean? Like, it's not like, let's actually talk about your concerns that you have. And I'll talk about the concerns I have with the way that you're making these videos and the way you're misrepresenting, what not just myself, but many other dog trainers are posting to try to convey some sort of message that I'm not actually even sure what you're trying to convey. Yeah. So let's talk about it. Let's make it happen. And I guess I'm airing this out now because my hopes that it's actually going to happen are fairly low. So if it does, and we're locked in, we are confirmed. Zoom link is sent to him. He's confirmed he got it, right? Like, so if for whatever reason this doesn't happen, I just want you guys to know I tried.
Yeah.
I tried.
And that's my biggest thing is I told you I watched a couple of his like videos and I don't understand his argument.
Yeah. Well, so I've really binged a lot of his content like over the last week since this was going to happen, because like if I'm going to go into a conversation like this, I want to go in like fairly prepared. And the first handful I watched, I was like, what are you saying? Like I wasn't fully sure either.
Yeah, that's me.
As I got into it, I think I have an idea of what his overarching, concern is, right? An issue and stuff like that. Yeah. And I think that the issue he has is some of it, some of it is, I think there's probably going to be more that we probably agree on, as far as like issues with, the balance training world with the force-free world. Because I've talked many times on this podcast before about things I think that the balanced dog training world are doing that are just kind of bullshit also. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I just don't necessarily know if this is the way of going about. I just think he's kind of taking it a little too far. And then past that, like there is a serious lack of videos of him working with dogs. There's a couple on there, and it'll be interesting for us to then debate some of the things he's doing and why I think that I don't know if the way he's doing it is significantly more effective or efficient than what anybody else is doing. But I think it'll make interesting conversation, and it'll be interesting to see what comes about with it. Yeah.
It'll be interesting.
So listen, guys, I've said it 1,000,001 times before. I'll talk to anybody.
Yeah.
Talk to anybody.
Yes, sir.
Y'all just gotta come on. That's it, right? Unfortunately, like a lot of the other people that have made videos, talking about us in the past, they just kind of flake out, right? Robert Haynes flaked out, there's another girl, Canine Tay, I believe, that's made a couple videos about our our pot cake videos that we put out, right? Talking about how terrible that was. Well, those dogs are now in homes, like living their best life, right? And that never would have happened because of our training. And past that, same deal. She like agreed to do a podcast with us, and then last minute emailed me saying, my grandma's sick and I can't do it. And I was like, oh, okay, cool. Can we reschedule it for like January? And she's just like, I just don't know what my life is going to look like in January. So I just can't commit to anything. It's like, okay, cool. Well, like, sorry, but like, it sounds like you're not confident enough in your opinions on things to be able to accurately like have a debate about it.
Yeah.
Right. So whatever.
And this is why we don't tell you guys usually about,
because they always fall through.
Yeah.
They always fall through.
Who's that TikTok guy? Like 2 years ago that we were going to have on. And like,
which one? Oh, well, that was a weird situation. Yeah. So there was also like when TikTok shit was blowing off, I was inviting all those motherfuckers on too. There was a TikTok woman that was supposed to come on.
I remember her too.
What the hell was her name?
I can't remember.
Something the leash. I'm sure everybody's seen this person's videos before. Beyond the leash, that's it. Beyond the walk. Yeah, beyond the walk. Whatever. She's big on TikTok for, basically same deal, just like calling people out and stuff like that. And that would have been an interesting one because I think she's actually, for as much as I think, she really is not very nice online. I do think she's intelligent, and I think that would have made a really interesting debate. Yeah. Same deal. That one, we were all scheduled to do it, right? Yeah. And then that was right around when I had the dog daddy on the podcast for the very first time. That's right. And she re-emailed me. I still have the email. She emailed me the day after that podcast went live and was like, you know what? I was going to come on your podcast, but then I saw you platformed the dog daddy, and I just can't have anything to do with that. Blah, blah. It's like, whatever,
I'm so glad we're over that term. Like, you platformed
the dog daddy.
Like, get out of here.
Whatever. So okay, so let's get into though like the actual video here and some of the good questions we were asking. So I'll pull up the video here real quick, and we'll just kind of look through some of these comments. 62 comments on it. That's pretty good for a YouTube video.
Yeah, it is.
I'll just kind of burn through some of these. Some of them aren't even questions. They're just whatever. They're just good statements and stuff. Good statements. So a guy commented, he said, a sign of a good trainer is one that shows up ready to help you rather than bash any previous training you've already gotten. You could hear the owner's frustration and want to vent, but at the end of the day, it's about filling in the gaps for them. It has nothing to do with the previous training. Strong work. I like that comment a lot because when you're in these situations where you're working with dogs who have been to a bunch of other trainers before, like, sure, in the back of my mind, I'm like, we talked about this last time on the podcast, like, guys, like, come on. Like what, like you took so much money from this client. They're trying, they're nowhere near where they need to be. Yeah. Like, what's going on? Like, like, why could you not have been able to help them through some of these easy fixes? Yeah, right?
Exactly.
But in the end of the day, we are there to, like he said, fill in the gaps and help this client overcome her issues. And yes, a lot of the clients would be fucking gung-ho on if we started fucking shit talking this trainer, like, God, blah, blah, blah. They would jump on that shit. They probably have so much pent-up frustration over this. Like when Michelle worked with a client, like when she came in and told Michelle, like, yeah, I'm not having any fucking reactivity issues on the walk, Michelle was like, wow, it is probably equally exciting as well as frustrating that all you needed was one session to get past this. You know what I mean?
Definitely.
So just got to jump in, just got to kind of help out, right?
Yeah.
Great video. Love the way the dog was able to start adjusting his behavior once the expectation became clear. It's also great to see all the training and effort the owner has put in come together with good communication and clarity. And that's an important thing to focus on, is that with proper training, right? We could fix, like it's not like they did bad training, right? Like the dog was trained, which is why we were able to fix this in one session, right?
Yeah.
It wasn't a matter of fixing training, or it wasn't a matter of, teaching the dog new things. It was about taking the training the dog already had and applying it, and watching the dog start to adjust his behavior in real time, I think is the coolest thing, right? Yeah. And this is getting back to like some of the misrepresentation of the work we're doing in that video that this Dale McCluskey posted. Like he ended the video right when I took the dog, right? And basically corrected the dog for the first time and got the dog to like stabilize for a minute. And he ended the video basically like, look at that fucking dog's head is on a swivel. The behavior is still there, blah, blah, blah. And to which I always tell everybody, like, of course it is, right? We started 10 seconds ago, right? So here's how the progression generally kind of flows with these dogs, right? Is they are super fired up, super distracted, and they want to just unload that reactivity on everything, or that frustration on everything, right? Yeah. Then we tell them, hey, you got to keep your shit together for a second here. And they say, this is really fucking hard for me to keep my shit together, but I'm going to try my hardest, right? And then as we progress, the dog then generally will make a couple more mistakes as they try to keep their shit together and realize it's too hard. We correct and punish those things, right? The dog then starts keeping their shit together a little bit easier. The head's less on a swivel. They're not vocalizing and expressing themselves as much. And then they start to finally relax into what the expectation is of them at that moment. But it's not like a switch flicks, right? It's not like you go into these situations and it's like, boom, I take the leash and suddenly the dog is just no longer reactive, no longer concerned about other dogs. It's like, we gotta kind of slowly progress into that, right? So I like seeing that progression also, and I think this video highlights it extremely well, right? Bunch of other comments. Enjoy that you train the dog in front of you. How you explain comments about working with dogs on an individual level. I'm constantly changing methods based on what works for the individual dog I'm working with. This is why using all four quadrants of operant conditioning and classical conditioning sets you up for success. I always say, when I hear people say, and I don't think this is what this person was saying, right? But they were like, every dog learns different and you need to train them all differently as individuals, right? Okay. And that point, I always kind of push back on a little bit because I disagree. All animals learn from the same fundamental rules of learning. Okay. Right? The only difference and the only thing that changes is the degree of motivation needed on those individual like branches of learning, right? In order to get them to kind of progress past, the point that you want them to progress past, right? Okay. So it's like it's not like I see some people say, like in one of the comments we'll get to, like, oh, well, punishment doesn't work with all dogs, right? Or this method wouldn't work with all dogs. And I would say, like, the method absolutely would work with all dogs. The difference is the amount of motivation behind the punishment or the negative reinforcement or the positive reinforcement or whatever it may be in order to get the dog to care more about the method that we're implementing than the distraction that's present at that moment. Yeah. Right? So whatever. So all dogs do learn the same. It's just a matter of just finding the individual motivation of those pieces, right?
So you're saying like the fundamentals are all basically the same, but
yeah, like let's take this example, right? So the routine I implemented and the routine I generally will implement with a lot of my clients that I'm working with this kind of stuff is, okay, so we have to have a clear routine of what we do when we see other dogs, right? I chose to put the dog into a sit. I chose to have a clear way to punish for non-compliance of that sit. And then I chose to have a clear way to reward for correct behavior while in that sit, right? Yeah. So that method will, without a question of a doubt, work with every single dog on the face of the planet. The differences would only be if you found it wasn't working, was your punisher motivating enough for the dog to care more about it than breaking command? And is your reward that you're using for correct behavior motivating enough where the dog is actively going to take it when under the amount of stress that they're currently at? And then from there, the only things that would ever like adjust if those like let's say I was really struggling finding a punisher that was motivating enough, maybe I would need to create a little more distance to make it easier and make the dog more motivated by the punisher because there's less of a competing motivator present.
Yeah.
Right? But the rules of the learning are exactly the same.
Okay.
Exactly the same.
Yeah.
Right? Next one. Oh my God, dude, teach me to talk to my clients like this. So one thing that I think this video highlighted extremely well was how I was able to articulate the point of what the client was doing incorrect in a way that, one, resonated with them, and two, this is something I'm very, very aware of when I'm working with clients, especially ones that have been to other trainers, and two, didn't totally contradict everything she had been told by her other trainers. Because this wasn't a game of everything you've been told is wrong and my method is correct and you have to just follow my method. I had to find a way to kind of sew it in there in a way where she could build on what she had already achieved, because it's not like she achieved nothing, right? She had been trying and she had been finding success, but I had to figure out a way to sew in my method in a way where it didn't totally derail everything that was going on in her head. Because then you're talking, she's got to break all these bad habits that she has. We're asking her to forget everything she'd learned before, which is unrealistic, right? Yeah. Even things like at one point in it, she said, you know, my trainer told me that I shouldn't correct for reactivity, right? That it's just the dog expressing themselves, right? And though I don't totally agree with that, right? There's absolutely cases where I would correct for reactivity, right? And simply just correct for reactivity. I had to figure out a way to explain to her, like, this is why what they're saying is kind of correct, right? But with a few caveats. And I think the way that I did it was, you know, in the moment, what we were correcting for actually had nothing to do with the reactivity. We were correcting for non-compliance of the thing that I was asking the dog to do ultimately, right? So we were able to show her that, hey, we're not correcting the reactivity. We're not telling the dog they can't express themselves. We're just telling them when I ask you to do something, regardless of what's going on around you, you have to ultimately still do that thing.
Yeah.
Right? And then from there, as the dog kept themselves under control, but kind of expressed themselves in like, you know, letting some noises out and saying, this is really hard and all that kind of stuff. I said, I'm going to allow that bit of expressing themselves because that's them just letting us know that this is really hard right now.
Yeah.
Right? But I'm kind of recalibrating the expectations a little bit. So whatever. So there is a lot of that goes into working with clients, is figuring out a way to help them understand things at the right times.
Yeah.
Right? I had to ease her into a lot of this process and help her see some of the results, and then little by little coach her through things in a way that was empowering as opposed to tearing something else down. Right?
Yeah. I feel like that's where a lot of trainers that take on clients that have training in the past probably fault, because they do that. Hey, you got to forget all this.
Yes. And
you got to do it my way. That's really cool that you did kind of weave. Okay, so you know this, and this is how you've been taught. Well, we'll use that, but we'll mold. We can mold it into a way that'll work with how I train.
Yes.
That's cool.
Okay, so this is moving to more of the actual questions that I thought were really interesting that I kind of wanted to talk about here, Shel.
Okay.
This next one. Do you think the method of letting the dog be on a loose leash, not in command, then correcting for any lunging is more clear for them to understand the correction versus them being in a sit or down, just correcting for breaking the command? Would they essentially understand that the correction is linked to the bad behavior of lunging? This is a really good question because it does kind of sound like, if you take it at its core, that I'm contradicting myself a little bit from the standpoint of one thing I tell people all the time is we don't use obedience to stop behavioral issues. We just punish behavioral issues, right? So I always say, like, if your dog is jumping, I'm not going to stop the jumping by making them do a really good down stay. I'm just going to stop them from jumping, right? Or whatever it may be.
Yeah.
Here is So it sounds like basically what I'm saying is I'm stopping the reactivity through using obedience commands. And why wouldn't I just stop the bad behavior of reacting?
Yeah.
So here's the really interesting thing about how I view reactivity, right? Let's say we were adopting the method that this guy said, right? And we were just correcting for lunging on a leash,
Yeah.
right? Well, let's look at what's appropriate behavior versus what's inappropriate behavior, right? Because we have to start off with, is the dog actually rehearsing a specific unwanted behavior that can be corrected for? Okay, so let's say the dog is not in command, right? Let's say let's say the dog's not even on a leash, right? And we're somewhere, right?
Okay.
Wherever, right? We're at a park,
Yeah.
we're at a dog park, we're in your backyard, whatever it may be, right? And the dog's not in command, and the dog sees something in the environment they want to go engage with, right? Like a person or a dog or whatever it may be. And they just go casually start walking over towards that dog, right? Is the dog doing something wrong in that moment?
If there's no command or anything?
They're not in command. They're just off leash at the park, and they see a person and they want to go walk over and say hi to that person.
I mean, I guess if they're not in command, then no.
Right? Okay. So we're saying that in that context, if the dog is free and wants to approach a person, that they're not doing anything wrong. Now let's say they're not in command, they're off leash, and they want to go like walk briskly over towards that person. Are they doing something wrong? I would argue no.
Yeah, I'd still
Right?
say no.
Let's say they go running over toward that person. They see somebody, they're really excited. Let's say, whatever. Let's say it's my wife, right? They see my wife arrive at the park. They're not in command and they want to go run over and say hi. I don't think they're really doing anything wrong,
No.
right? Now let's tack on the dog is not in command, right? But they're on a leash and we're at a park and I release them, right? I release them, right? And we're next to a person right here and they go run over to that person and start sniffing them. If they're not in command, they're not doing anything wrong. There's plenty of times that people with their dogs on leash release their dog to allow them to go say hi to a person, right? Now, let's say they do it with a little bit more intensity. Are they doing anything wrong? Let's say they do it with a little more intensity. Are they doing anything wrong? What I'm getting at here is if a dog is not in command, there's not really rules to them engaging with things going on in their environment, right? The only reason why we perceive it as a bad behavior in that moment is generally because we have no control over the dog while they're doing that thing, right? We have no ability to get them to reel it back in. And because of the fact that they're on a leash, it creates more frustration because they're trying to get to that thing over there that they can't get to. And it looks like quote unquote reactivity. And we've just determined that when it hits a certain point, it's no longer acceptable.
That's true. Yeah.
But look at how gray of a criteria and expectation that is.
Very.
Super gray, right?
Yeah.
I cannot define at exactly what point does it become a problem, right? Exactly at what point, if the dog is not in command, is them trying to casually go investigate something that's going on over that way that it's inappropriate, right? Therefore, if I can't define exactly at what point it's wrong and I start just correcting for this, right? How is the dog going to know what ultimately they need to avoid? Unless we're just saying that when you're on a leash, you're never allowed to approach dogs or people, which I suppose if you want to do that, you can't. Like, you know what I mean? Like if you make it this black and white thing that when you are on a leash, you are never allowed to engage with people or dogs. But at that point, it's like, is that a realistic or fair expectation? And can that just be solved? Because you're not going to say you can't communicate. It's hard. It's even hard to explain sometimes because it's like you can't communicate to a dog energy level. You know what I mean? I can't communicate to you that you're allowed to investigate people and dogs when you're not in command up to 40% energy. And then after 40% energy, you start getting corrections for it. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like that's impossible to do. So your only alternative, if you want to be like accurate, is all or nothing, right? When you're on a leash, you will 100% of the time get punished if you try to approach or investigate a dog or person at all with any amount of energy, which at that point, that feels unfair. It wouldn't be inaccurate, but it feels extremely unfair when I could achieve the exact same thing by just saying when you're on a leash, if it's not a situation that's appropriate to investigate things going on around you, I just engage you in command and enforce that expectation. Does that make sense?
It does make sense.
So that's the way that I view that. And that's why I think that that's a really good question and a very interesting question. And I actually think that the way that this individual is describing addressing it, I think is far more confusing for the dog. Because the problem is, again, not that they want to investigate a person or dog, but that right now is not the time or place to do it. And when we're in situations where the dog isn't necessarily doing anything wrong, but time and place makes it inappropriate, that's where we use commands to manage the dog. Right? And the problem is simply that when the dog is in command, you cannot get the dog in command when they're reacting usually.
Yeah.
Right? So the problem is like a complete lack of ability to control the dog in the presence of these triggers.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think you said it before, like, I mean, when you release a dog or a dog is not in command, that is their freedom, their free time. Like that's
free.
Yeah. There's nothing. They have no understanding except for like if you call them back or something, they should. But at that moment, they're free. You know, there's no expectation for them.
Yeah. It's, you know what I mean? Like it's just like, you know, like that's the way it works.
Yeah, that's just how it is. I mean,
that's the way it works. So that's my answer to that question, right? And that's why I view that way. Okay, so this person said, the problem I think with this that I will depend on all the time commands to control the reactivity. Is this a true statement? Thank you for this video. Also, some dogs go easily over threshold if you correct breaking command with an e-collar. With some dogs, it's make activation forward and escalation. Any chance to touch on this point? So basically what this person is saying is that, similar to what the last individual says, is that if I don't put the dog in command, will they still be reactive? Is this true? And then the other question is, some dogs go easily over threshold if you correct breaking command with an e-collar, right? So I'm going to address these backwards. I'll start with the correcting with an e-collar causing some dogs to escalate. So that gets back to my comment I made just a little bit ago, which is all dogs learn the same, right? But every dog is motivated by something different. So is there some dogs that the e-collar is not a motivating enough tool in order to get them to tone it back in when I punish them for something when they're in an aroused state of mind? Yes, absolutely. Right? We talk about that all the time, right? There's some dogs, it's not that the e-collar makes it worse, right? It's that the e-collar is not motivating enough in that moment for them to want to avoid it over what it is that they're doing.
For sure. Yeah.
Right? That's all it is. Right? So for dogs like that, we need to figure out, one, is there a more clear punisher that we could use that is more motivating to the dogs? We've talked a lot before about bonkers and pet correctors and things like that, which for some dogs can be far more effective of a punishment in the moment for stuff like that. Or that's where we depend on, we create more distance. Right? Sometimes some people will start using the e-collar when they're 3 feet away from another dog reacting, right? And it shoots you in the foot, right? The other thing too is if you watch the video, there's a lot of places where we gain leverage prior to ever correcting for the dog, you know, let's just say not holding a sit command in the presence of the other dog, right? Before that, make sure that we address all of the issues on the walk. Where a lot of people, here's how it works with a lot of people, right? They go for their walk. They don't see another dog. They're nagging the dog with the e-collar the entire freaking walk, right? The dog's basically learning to just blow off the e-collar because they're never actually learning how to avoid it in the context of the walking, right? And then they see another dog. They try to put the dog in a sit. The dog's still in a super frustrated state of mind, in a state of mind where they're blowing off e-collar corrections left and right, and then they try to crank it up and nail the dog for not holding that sit in the presence of the other dog. But for the last 20 minutes while you're walking the dog's just learned that they can blow off e-collar corrections. So obviously, as you increase the intensity, especially around a trigger, they're definitely going to try to blow it off in that moment.
Yeah.
Right? So sometimes it's not so much as simple as just the e-collar isn't motivating enough in that context, but the dog doesn't actually understand how to avoid an e-collar correction. Right?
Yeah.
They've never had a consequence with the e-collar before that they've learned how to avoid. So they just learn every time they feel it, if they push through it harder, that they can make it stop. Right? And then we've talked about, their baseline level of stress is already really, really high because they haven't addressed the problems on the walk. Like there's way more to this than just correcting the dog when the dog doesn't sit in the presence of the other dogs.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that's where some of this confusion comes from is exactly that. Right. To the point of, will I always be dependent on the commands to control the reactivity? Yes and no, right? So the first side of the equation is what we just talked about, which is if the dog is not in command and trying to approach other dogs, they're not really doing anything wrong. So yes, if you don't want your dog to approach other dogs, if you deem it a situation where it's not appropriate for them to approach other dogs, yes, to some extent, you're always going to have to manage the dog through some sort of command in order to communicate to them. Right now is not the time to do that. The difference is, reactivity from the standpoint of what we determine is a problem. So the explosion of energy, the crazy lunging and barking and stuff is a byproduct of they've tried to approach dogs so many times on the leash that we've never managed it and never gained a degree of control. So the frustration is so much higher and it looks like this really intense version.
Yeah.
Right. Let's say I'm with my dogs and I'm out on a walk and I don't have them in command and we were to walk right by another dog. They're not going to be freaking out, lunging, reacting and stuff like that because I never allow them to rehearse trying to approach other dogs where they're going to hit the end of the leash and get frustrated repeatedly in general.
Yeah.
But let's say this one time I don't do it. What probably would happen is they would probably go try to walk over to the other dog and hit the end of the leash and be like, oh shit, I really want to sniff that dog, but I can't right now. Right. But since I'm never allowing them to rehearse it, it never escalates to that point of being extremely problematic because I proactively engage them in some sort of management when we see other dogs when we're out and about. So the dog is just constantly practicing a calm state of mind around them. So if they weren't in command, it wouldn't be super intense.
True.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Does that need to be said more clearly or no?
No. I do have a question about, so like when you say like creating like distance and stuff like that. Like, so when people are maybe every time they're having a problem still, and let's say they just have the e-collar, they don't have a pet corrector, or they don't want to do the bonker or whatever. When you're saying creating distance, is that to help kind of maybe smooth those interactions? Like you're at a farther distance and you're having more success, and then you kind of come back to closing the gap on.
So, I get what you're saying. So let's look at levels of difficulty, right? So me working 3 feet away from another dog is going to be significantly harder than me working 30 feet away from another dog.
Yeah.
Right. And 3 feet from another dog, the dog is going to be in a far more heightened state of arousal than 30 feet away from another dog.
Yeah.
And when a dog is in a higher state of arousal or drive, it's going to take a stronger punishment or a stronger reward in order to get the dog to focus in, right?
Yeah.
So if you're struggling with keeping your dog under control really, really close by, and you feel like the e-collar is just escalating the dog in that moment. Again, the e-collar isn't escalating the dog. It's just that your e-collar correction isn't motivating enough per the dog's state of mind.
Exactly.
Right? So if we're further away, it helps gain a little bit more leverage where that e-collar correction will be more motivating to the dog in that moment.
Exactly.
So if you could chip away at it there and basically take the dog's state of mind from a freaking 20 out of 10 down to a 11 out of 10 from a distance. As you get closer, instead of the dog's state of mind being a freaking 25 out of 10, maybe it would only be a 15 out of 10.
Yeah.
Right? So it makes it easier to then address it in closer distance.
Exactly.
which is why force-free trainers say all the time, work from a distance to keep the dog under threshold, right? It's the same concept, right? The only difference is the force-free trainers are saying it so that if the dog is under threshold, they'll care more about the reward. Where 3 feet away from the other dog, they wouldn't care about the reward. We're doing the same thing for our punishers as well. So we're working from a distance where the dog is going to care enough about the punishers from a distance so that we could slowly close that gap.
Yeah. Cool.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. Like that.
Okay, what else we got here? This is a question we got from somebody. I'm curious and meant to ask, would it make a difference for this dog if you held continuous for 3 to 5 seconds for those first initial corrections? When would you find a tap momentary being more beneficial versus the continuous? So this whole question, right, was basically stemmed from this idea that the first time I did it, I needed to correct the dog, I think 3 times before the dog settled down.
Yeah.
Right. So basically they're asking, well, if you held it for 3 to 5 seconds, wouldn't that be more motivating to the dog? The answer is yes, it would be more motivating to the dog. But initially, I always say this, right? I focus on clarity versus motivation.
Yeah.
So I'm not going into this right off the rip with let me get as much motivation as humanly possible. I'm going into this of let me reset what the boundary and the expectation is for the dog. So before I start cranking up the intensity to the absolute utmost that I absolutely can possibly have it, I need to make sure the dog understands how to escape or avoid the correction that I'm applying first, right? So I chose to repeat the correction of no, sit, no, sit, no, sit, right? A couple of times to give the dog an opportunity in between those corrections to learn how to fix themselves. And at that point, if I knew that the expectation was really, really clear to them and I needed more motivation, then I would look at alternative forms of motivation. But at that point, honestly, holding the button, I find is at that point, the type of motivation that I'm using probably just isn't motivating enough. And I can hold it all day long. It's not going to do you a whole lot of good.
That's true.
We get these types of questions all the time. It's stuff like this. Why not praise the dog verbally when he's neutral? There were moments of success when a trigger appeared. Why not praise verbally to reinforce his behavior? People look at praise sometimes like it's just you praise the dog and it's motivating to them. Right? That's just not how it works, guys. It is not at all how it works. The dog must be motivated by the praise in order for it to technically because why would you use praise? You would use praise to try to increase the probability that a behavior would continue happening. So in this case, the dog being neutral in the presence of other dogs, right? So you're using positive reinforcement. You're applying something to increase the probability the dog will do it in the future. I have to know the dog is motivated enough by it to want it in the future to then increase the probability of the behavior. Right? This is a dog I just worked with for the very first time ever, right? The dog is clearly still fixating on other dogs. So me giving praise in that moment could actually be annoying to the dog, which could actually then decrease. It could shoot me in the foot, right? It could actually be punishment, right? Or it could be negative reinforcement, right? Depending on how it is that I'm leveraging it, obviously. So this is why I choose not to add. If I'm going to use a reward, I'm going to use something really, really clear as a reward. I'm not going to lean into this praise and stuff because it can shoot you in the foot more than anything.
Praise is for you.
Next one. You definitely don't want to use an e-collar at 100. Poor dog. Says who? Says you, right? But it worked. So whatever. This was the last big question is this person said, this strategy isn't ideal. Why is reactivity being addressed with an e-collar? Why is the dog constantly asked to be stationary? And if the dog has zero relationship with the handler, reactivity isn't a quick fix. So just addressing these one at a time. Why is reactivity being addressed with an e-collar? Why not? Again, says who says that you can't use an e-collar to address reactivity? This individual, obviously, and listen, there's plenty of trainers out there that say you can't use an e-collar to address reactivity. I think this dog's freaking original trainer was one that said that, obviously.
Probably.
But it's why not? Why not? And I know the reason why not is because people always say e-collars can create superstitious associations because it comes out of nowhere, blah, blah, blah. But all of this is under the guise of if you're using it improperly. Right? But that's with any freaking tool.
Oh, yeah.
Right? So, yes, you could use e-collar to stop reactivity, and we showed it with this dog, and obviously it worked, right? Next, this is another big one. Why is the dog constantly being asked to be stationary, right? We see people talk all the time about I think even Canine Decoded, right, made a post somewhat recently, Dr. Melanie, right, like talking about reactivity and how, reactivity is the dog's nervous system wanting to move. Yeah. Right. So like you should be trying to get the dog to move, right? As opposed to asking them to stay stationary, because asking them to stay stationary can cause them to be frustrated, which can increase your probability of reactivity. My issue with that entire conversation is, if we're looking at it, if the dog wants to move when they're being reactive, so you should never ask them to be stationary. So basically what you're saying is you're at the mercy of what the dog wants to do still.
Yeah.
Right? Mm-hmm. You're at the mercy of the dog wants to move, so you should never ask them to be stationary because they want to move, so it's going to make it harder. Now, do I agree that sometimes asking the dog to be stationary can be harder than if you ask them to move, quote unquote? Yeah, sure. Right?
Yeah.
But that's a muscle that needs to be flexed.
Yeah.
Right? It's a muscle that needs to be flexed. Yeah. Yes. This is why on that Canine Decoded podcast, I asked her about mental restraint. We were talking about the place cot, right? Mm-hmm. And, even she kind of agreed with, yes, it absolutely can be harder. Sometimes it can be more mentally restraining for them. Yeah. But that's a muscle that needs to be flexed. Yeah. Because if with your reactive dog, you can never ask them to be stationary and you always need to move because that's what the dog wants to do, which is what's going to make it harder. Yeah. That's no success either.
No.
Right? So I choose to hold the dog to a higher standard and say that with my reactive dog, there is going to be times I need to ask them to be stationary.
Yeah.
Right? Mm-hmm. And just because it's hard for them in this moment doesn't mean that they're not able to do it.
True.
Right? So whatever. So that's kind of my issue with that. And then secondly, some other people ask, well, if they want to move, wouldn't it be easier to just do a come command, and enforce that come command, right? Mm-hmm. Well, this gets back to like the mental restraint conversation. Yes, they're moving from the standpoint of like they're making distance, right? Yeah. But they're still restrained to a very, very small window of space that we're asking them to stay within, which is right next to us in that moment.
Yeah.
Right? And I would argue that is not really achieving that much more of a sense of, oh, I'm moving, so I'm getting my flex out. They're still trapped in that moment to this freaking 4x4 box right next to you, just like if they were in a sit and trapped to this 4x4 box next to you. Yeah. Right? Mm-hmm. Very, very similar. In addition to that, I think I said this in the actual video, a lot of the reason why I choose a stationary command as opposed to just walking past the trigger and enforcing that expectation is because a stationary command is so black and white to not just the dog, to the owner. Right? Yeah. They're in it or they're not in it. You could see the exact moment when they're no longer in it. So your timing with your consequences or your rewards or whatever it is can be 100% consistent and accurate every time. Where with the walk, the line of they're an inch ahead of you, they're 2 inches ahead of you, they're 3 inches ahead of you, they're a foot ahead of you. Yeah. It's so freaking gray. Your corrections are going to be so poorly timed because of that. And it's going to be way too complicated for you to set a clear message to the dog. And I would argue that the benefit you get from the dog walking next to you in still a very rigid formation and punishing for noncompliance of that is completely outweighed by the inconsistency with the consequences that you're providing. And that creates way more stress and way more frustration than you just asking the dog to sit stationary next to you.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
So that's why I choose to do that. And then the last thing they said, and the dog has zero relationship with the handler. It's like, obviously, that's why they hired them, right? I just met the dog also. I'm not going to... This is where you get this relationship conversation. We're holding the dog to a clear expectation, and we're developing a relationship of what's expected of them in the moment with that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
The relationship thing is so great. It's like, what does that mean? This Dale McCluskey guy in a lot of his videos also talks about, like, you're not in tune with the relationship, right? Like, so you're not building any sort of relationship with the dog. It's like, but then you watch, like, the videos that he's posting, and it's still... The only difference is he's using a choke chain and constantly correcting the dog with a choke chain and nagging the dog every time the dog tries to air sniff in one direction or whatever it may be. It's like, okay, cool. So I want to dig into what is this relationship, right? So are you saying you're developing a positive relationship through that? Right?
Yeah.
Because like we could debate like, well, that seems really naggy and that the dog probably is really, really annoyed with you the entire time that's going on. Where the way that I'm doing it, yeah, maybe initially I'm giving bigger corrections. The dog's like, whoa, I don't know what the heck's going on. But then they just don't get corrections after that. And then I could develop a relationship of, oh, this person actually isn't constantly nagging and micromanaging me the entire time.
True.
Right. Or in the case of like what I'm assuming this person says, it's like, oh, well, you don't have any engagement.
No.
Right. So it's like, the dog doesn't have this like positive relationship with you. It's like, well, like if the dog is freaking out, reacting every 4 seconds with you, whatever engagement and positive relationship you have outside of that, it clearly isn't a very good one, or else the dog wouldn't be reacting still.
Yeah.
And then the last point is like reactivity isn't a quick fix. It was with this dog.
Yeah. One day.
There's nothing wrong with a quick fix, guys.
No.
So whatever. So those are the questions. Kind of started ranting at the end a little bit there, but that's what's been going on. That video's kind of been popping off.
Yeah.
It's stirring all sorts of conversation and controversy and stuff like that. And sometimes it's like, okay, we could debate training methods all day, and I'm happy to do it with anybody, right? And maybe we'll do it a little bit Friday as far as this is concerned. But sometimes what we need to look at is just the efficiency of the method, and clearly we could say, well, this is bad to do normally, or this is bad to do normally, or you shouldn't do it this way, but it's like it worked, guys.
Yeah.
Right? And sometimes
matters.
let's just look at, did it work or did it not work? And
Literally.
if it didn't work, sure, then we could debate there's a better method or this or that. But in this case, guys, it worked. It worked for a reason, and that's my 2 cents.
And the client and the dog are having a happy, healthy life now.
All that matters.
Yep.
So, guys, we'll leave you on that one. Hopefully Friday we'll have a nice, juicy little debate for you guys.
Yeah.
We'll see if it happens.
Crossing our
If you guys have any
fingers.
questions on anything, or if you want any follow-up points on any of those things I kind of rambled about as far as like the random questions and stuff we were getting on YouTube, feel free to ask away, and I'll give you guys my 2 cents. If you're interested in virtual training options, shoot us an email. But we're going to wrap that up on that because I got to get to the shop and work it.
Yes, have a good one.